Hi everyone, it's Nicole here for Simon Says Stamp, and today I kind of have a two-in-one kind of project. I started with the rose lattice background from the February 2019 Simon Says Stamp card kit of the month, and because I die cut a heart from it, I didn't want that to go to waste, so I created two cards instead of just one so that I could utilize that entire beautiful background. We're going to be doing some direct coloring on this stamp to get this multicolored rose lattice background. Let's start by putting some of our cotton candy pink cardstock trimmed to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. This is A2 size, into our MISTI, and I've also already adhered the rose lattice background cling stamp included in the February kit, also available for individual purchase, in the MISTI, and I am coloring this in with some Tombow mono dual tip brush markers. And I have listed the color numbers. I'm only using 4 colors, and really I probably could have gotten by with one of the pink colors rather than both. I don't know that both of the colors translate really well, but I did use both of these, and then I used 2 colors of green. I worked in sections. I found that that really worked the best. I'm going to show part of this in the video, but I will turn the camera off for the rest of it because it's just repeating this over and over. What I ended up finding that worked the best was working in rows. So right now I'm kind of just working in a section more than a row. What I ended up doing was going all the way across the row, coloring it in. I would maybe do even a couple rows at a time, and then stamping that image on my background paper. That was so that the ink didn't dry. If I had tried to color in the whole background, it may have dried and been a little bit harder to, reactivate that ink, either with huffing on it, which I don't know if that would have really worked all that great, or misting with water. And I didn't really want a watercolor effect. I'm not using a watercolor cardstock, and I wasn't sure how that would work. So I simply would color in a couple rows and then stamp the image. This was more of a just trial and error. I wanted to see if this was going to work. So I did a little section. I am now going to go and just do a couple of rows across, which is here what I'm doing here, and stamp these remaining images. And this worked really, really well. I didn't have to use any water. If you did want to, if maybe you are using a watercolor cardstock, I have created a similar background previously with a different floral background stamp from Simon Says Stamp. I will link to that at the end of this video if you want to see that. You can color it in, spritz it. I would suggest like a mini mister that gives a really fine mist. And then of course your watercolor cardstock to stamp your images on, and it's going to give you a very beautiful watercolor effect. What I love about this technique is that instead of a solid color stamped image, which I think is super beautiful, this is a gorgeous stamp, you guys, so pretty, and you can do some great things with that. This just kind of takes it up a notch. It really adds a lot of interest. The leaves are green, the flowers are pinky red, and it just is super beautiful. What ends up happening is instead of being like the supporting cast, this beautiful background is the focal point. And the reason I ended up creating 2 cards today is because I loved how this turned out so much that when I die cut the heart shape from this panel, I didn't want to just toss it. I wanted to utilize it in some way, so I found another way to create a similar card so that I could have 2 cards with this background, and I could utilize every single piece of the background. So I finished stamping that beautiful background, and now I have some dies here. This is the Nested Hearts dies from Simon Says Stamp, and I'm going to die cut a heart shape from kind of the bottom right corner of this panel using, I think it's about the 3rd smallest heart die. I'm thinking 3rd or 4th. It's really kind of just the middle of the road, and I'm going to bet it's the 4th. And I'm going to Die cut that, and that's where my greeting is going to go. I picked this size of heart because I want to use the Love You Always sentiment from the Love Always stamp set. Now, originally I thought I might try to pop this on black cardstock, and that just is not working for me at all. I want to tell you guys, I played with different combinations of cardstock for the heart accents. I messed around with this so long, longer than I would like to admit, really. And I couldn't find the right color of cardstock. I tried the dull pink cardstock from the kit. I tried to do a tone-on-tone with the cotton candy cardstock and do some solid hearts, and I thought they blended into the background too much. What I ended up doing was taking the 2 shades of pink or pinkish red markers that I used for the flowers in the rose lattice background and coloring them on some of the ivory cardstock from the kit, just scribbling them back and forth for an ombre effect and die cutting those hearts from those colored pieces. And I loved it. I think it's because it was exactly the same color as the roses. And so it just worked so much nicer. It was the right color. If you ever have a need to create an accent that perfectly coordinates with everything else, use your markers, use your colored pencils. You can create the perfect shade or background with those and then die cut your images from that, and you have a perfectly complementary accent for your card. So I did 2 hearts from this scribbled piece, actually 3 because I'm going to use one on the other card as well, plus the sentiment strip, because I played around with the sentiment strip too and I just could not get the right color, and so it kind of balances out this card especially. I have 2 hearts in the sentiment strip, which gives you that visual triangle of the darker pink. On the larger size heart here, and I do want to mention it did get cut out of the video and I apologize for that, the Love You Always sentiment that goes in the heart shape on my background, that was also colored in with these markers. Everything except for the white embossing I'm going to do here in a minute was created with these Tombow markers. So I colored in the Love You Always, I adhered it in my Misty, and then stamped it on the cotton candy pink cardstock several times until I got the right stamped impression. This also gets my greeting to perfectly match the rest of my card. So I'm using some powder tool to deactivate and keep my embossing powder hopefully onto the embossed or stamped shape. This heart shape is from the Love Always stamp set. I stamped it with a clear embossing ink, tapping off that excess ink, or pardon me, excess embossing powder, and I'm going to heat set that. And this is going to be white embossing powder to really set it off. And I had a few stray flakes, so I'm using a paintbrush to remove those. Little tip, if you ever have some embossing flakes that aren't where you want them to go, you can use a paintbrush to remove those. And then I'm heat setting this heart. The heart does not perfectly match up with this heart-shaped die, but I like how it adds just a little something to the heart and adds some nice interest. We're going to finish it with some jewels. So here is where I colored a little strip that I can stamp a sentiment, also from the Love Always stamp set included in the February kit. Stamped with clear embossing ink, sprinkle on some white embossing powder, tap off that excess, heat set that, trim it into a thin strip, and we're going to pop that onto our panel as well. The remaining 2 hearts for this card background, one was die cut from the markered background, and then I die cut the very smallest heart from the Nested Hearts die collection from the cotton candy cardstock, and we're going to layer that on top. So just snip off these ends, and this just finishes off the greeting. You could just leave it Love You Always, but I like the Love You Always, Love of My Life. I think that's kind of pretty. And as I mentioned, now you can see that visual triangle with the dark pink, dark pink, dark pink. Let's go ahead and adhere our background to our card base with some adhesive. This has the Love You Always stamped on it. You can see the ombre effect a little bit where it goes light to darker. the 2 shades of markers. We're going to completely cover the Rose Lattice background panel with foam adhesive now and pop that up. This has been trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4, meaning it's going to be slightly smaller than A2 size and have that nice white border all the way around, which I think nicely ties in to the white embossed accents on the heart and that small sentiment. And then I'm going to pop this up. The little bit of dimension just helps frame up the sentiment really nicely as well. So we'll line that up, pop that in place, and then we want to adhere our heart accents. So I've got one little heart slightly overlapping our sentiment heart. So I put a couple of foam adhesive squares underneath the part that overlaps, just so that that doesn't indent. I always like to put a little foam adhesive there, so kind of in the bottom right corner of the heart, and then regular adhesive, some glue dots or whatever everywhere else. Same thing with our sentiment strip. I'm going to put a little bit of adhesive under part of it, the part that overlaps the opening, so that it's flush with the rest of the foam adhesive, and then at the very end we're going to just put a glue dot to secure to the raised panel. And you can kind of just feel where that foam adhesive is, and it butts right up next to the opening. And then we're going to take our final heart to complete our visual triangle, kind of up in the upper right corner. Layer on a little cotton candy pink heart on top of this. And this, you can still see the Rose Lattice background is the focal point of this beautiful card design. I'm going to take the Crystal Katana and the Lawn Fawn glue tube, as well as some pretty pink Posh watermelon jewels, and finish off the card. I like these watermelon jewels. I thought they really complemented the colors that I'm using in this card nicely. And just add that nice little bit of glittery touch embellishment to the design. And the Crystal Katana makes it hands-free, which is awesome. Once I have my jewels in place, this card is all finished and I can move on to the second card design. The second card design is even more simple, and it's got way less of the Rose Lattice background, but I still think that you get that beautiful floral look. We're going to use just a few different heart dies and a little bit different layout, but generally it's about the same. I've got my hearts down in that bottom kind of right, hanging off the edge, but it's just going to be a little bit more simple, I guess, even though both of them are fairly simple in design. It's just not quite as busy. Maybe that's the word I'm looking for. So I've got another piece of that cotton candy cardstock trimmed to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inches. I'm going to leave this one that size, and the reason is I've die cut a larger heart than the one I die cut from the Rose Lattice background out of the side of this panel, and we're going to use that as kind of a frame for a Rose Lattice heart, and it's going to show the white card base behind, and I think that's enough white for this card. It's a pretty wide heart shape, and so I left my pink panel A2 sized. Before I adhere it to my card base, I am going to take a sentiment now, another sentiment from the Love Always stamp set, and I am going to color this in with my markers. So here you get an idea. I'm using the side of my marker and brushing those colors onto the sentiment for the ombre effect, and then I am going to stamp that on my background. A stamp positioner works great for this because you can see that it didn't stamp super great with the first impression. I can color this in as many times as I need to, stamp it as many times as I need to get the perfect stamped impression. And I love the tone on tone. I think by using the pinkish reds, it doesn't detract and take away from the pink feel of our card. like maybe black ink would, and it's still a lot more visible than I think even white ink would be. We're going to secure this then to our white top fold card base. I want to make sure I get adhesive around all the sides. And then we're going to secure our rose lattice heart right there in the center. See how pretty that's going to look? And I just love that there's no waste. We did not waste that beautiful rose lattice heart that we spent time coloring in with our markers. Now I decided to take some of the hearts from the Love Always stamp set and stamp those directly onto my background. So that's what I'm doing here, is I'm coloring them in with my Tombow markers so that they match perfectly and stamping them onto the background. This one's hanging off the edge just a little bit. By using the stamp positioner, again, I can stamp them multiple times to get them as dark as I need them to be. I've got another heart that I colored on ivory cardstock with these Tombow markers that I die cut with one of the nested heart dies. I'm going to pop it up with foam adhesive squares right there in the center of our rose lattice heart. Give it a little bit of layer, adds to that nice dark pink touch that we have with our sentiment and stamped hearts. And again, take those watermelon jewels, the Lawn Fawn glue tube, and the crystal katana, and adhere some jewels all over this card as well. So a couple on that raised heart. We're going to have some on the stamped hearts, around the stamped hearts, just kind of scattering them throughout this background to finish off the card design. And I can't recommend this crystal katana enough. It is so fantastic if you work with jewels, sequins, small dies. It makes putting them right where you want them to go so super easy, keeps your fingers out of the way, which is fantastic. So grabbing a couple more of these. And I added a few more to this card than the other one because they showed up against the solid background better than they did the rose lattice background. I had originally laid some out on the rose lattice background, but they just didn't show up because it's a busy background. With a nice solid background, the jewels show up a lot better. So there is a look at this finished card as well. Here they are side by side, so you can see that all of that rose lattice background was used and there was no waste. Thank you guys so much for joining me today for these two cards featuring components from the Simon Says Stamp February 2019 card kit. The supplies I used to create these cards are listed and linked below the video here on YouTube. Here are a couple more videos featuring Simon Says stamps and dies that you might be interested in. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.